Then it really hit me. I'm on the moon. I'm on the moon. And you kept thinking, nobody's ever been here before.
There are questions people hate answering, not because the evidence is missing, but because it's overwhelming. The moon landings happened. That much is undeniable. And yet, hidden beneath the pride of Apollo, one man carried a story he never dared to share. Charles Duke, the youngest astronaut to walk on the lunar surface, held a secret for 50 long years. A secret that lived inside him through silence, duty, and the weight of history. For decades, he smiled in interviews, waved proudly at parades, and relived the technical achievements of Apollo 16. He was celebrated as a hero, a pioneer, a man who had touched another world. But behind the calm mask of a test pilot and astronaut, there lingered something unsaid, something so unsettling that he believed no one would believe him. Now, with time slipping away, Charles Duke finally admits what he saw out there, in that cold, silent world. It wasn't in the mission checklists, it wasn't in the simulations, and it wasn't in the science books. This is not just the story of a moon landing. It is the story of a confession, one that shakes the very foundation of how we view our nearest neighbor in space. Apollo 16 wasn't just another trip to the moon. It was the gamble, the bet, the last great push into the highlands of a world that had teased humanity for millennia. And in that gamble, in that unrepeatable moment, Charles Duke stumbled upon a truth he could not share. Until now. By the early 1970s, NASA had already accomplished what many thought impossible. The world had seen men step onto lunar soil, plant flags, collect rocks, and return safely home. Apollo 11, 12, and 14 had proven beyond doubt that the United States could land humans on the moon. Apollo 15 had gone further, expanding exploration with the lunar rover. So when Apollo 16 was placed on the schedule, the question wasn't whether astronauts could reach the moon. It was, what more could be done? Scientists pressed for something deeper, something beyond symbolic footprints and flag planting. They wanted answers to the oldest mysteries of lunar science. How had the moon formed? What role did it play in Earth's own story? Did its ancient highlands hold clues about the violent birth of the solar system itself? Earlier missions had favored safety over ambition. They landed in relatively smooth plains called Maria, dark stretches of volcanic rock that were flat and predictable. Perfect for first attempts, but not for uncovering the moon's oldest secrets. The real treasure lay in the highlands, rugged, mountainous, and ancient. Scientists believed these towering ridges were the moon's exposed crust, the remnants of its earliest days. Samples from there could finally reveal whether the moon was born from Earth itself, torn away by some cataclysm, or whether it was a captured wanderer from deep space. But targeting the highlands meant embracing danger. The Descartes Highlands, Apollo 16's landing site, were treacherous. Slopes hid beneath shadows. Jagged boulders littered the surface. Ridges could trap the lunar module, tipping it like a toy. NASA's planners knew the risks. The lander carried only a small reserve of fuel. One wrong calculation during descent could mean disaster. Engineers warned of deep dust that might swallow the spacecraft whole. Others feared the craft would slide down unseen inclines. And yet, despite all the warnings, NASA pressed forward. The Apollo program was nearing its end. Budgets were shrinking. Missions were being canceled. If there was ever going to be a chance to sample the moon's oldest bones, it had to be now. Apollo 16 became more than just another mission. It became a final scientific gamble, a leap into the unknown. The Descartes Highlands had never been visited by humans. From Earth, they appeared bright, ancient, and mysterious. Some experts swore they were volcanic, remnants of lava that once gushed across the surface billions of years ago. Others insisted they were not volcanic at all, but piles of rubble from ancient impacts, meteors slamming into the moon during its violent youth. The stakes were high. Solving this debate wasn't just about lunar geology, it was about rewriting the story of planetary formation itself. Apollo 16 carried the hopes of an entire scientific generation. But as always, science came with risk. The descent would be one of the trickiest of the Apollo program. Unlike the relatively flat landing zones of earlier missions, the highlands demanded precision. Too far left, and they'd hit a slope. Too far right and they'd crash into a boulder field. Charles Duke, the lunar module pilot, knew the responsibility. His life and the success of the mission rested in those tense moments of descent. Every check, every call-out, every number mattered. The spacecraft, nicknamed Orion, groaned under the stress of its landing sequence. Below, the surface rushed closer, gray, harsh, unwelcoming. Duke's voice stayed steady, but his heart pounded. He knew their margin for error was razor-thin. At last, after a tense approach, Orion touched down. Dust rose, shadows stretched, and silence filled the headsets. They had made it. Humanity had placed its footprint in yet another untouched corner of the moon, but Apollo 16 wasn't about resting after landing. Every second on the surface was precious. Oxygen tanks ticked down. Batteries drained. Each moonwalk was a race against time itself. Over 3 days, Duke and Commander John Young explored the highlands, driving their lunar rover across slopes and ridges. They collected rocks, drilled into the surface, and set up experiments. They laughed, stumbled, and marveled at the alien beauty around them. But beneath the official tasks and rehearsed checklists, something else stirred. Duke could not shake the feeling that the highlands were not empty. He saw things, shadows that shifted, lights that flickered just beyond the ridges. Nothing he could explain, and nothing he dared to mention in the open channel. NASA had prepared them for mechanical failures, navigation errors, even emergencies that might strand them on the moon. But nothing could prepare a man for the moment when he looks across a barren alien world and feels he is not alone. The mission would return home a success. The samples collected disproved the volcanic theory, confirming that the highlands were formed by impacts. It was a triumph for science, proof that Apollo was worth the cost. Yet for Charles Duke, Apollo 16 would forever carry a second story, a story that never made it into the mission reports. The story of Apollo 16 was not only about landing in dangerous terrain. It was about the men who carried that risk on their shoulders. John Young was the commander. By 1972, he was already a NASA legend. He had flown on Gemini 3, testing America's first two-man spacecraft. He had orbited the moon on Apollo 10, coming within miles of the surface but never landing. He had smuggled a corned beef sandwich into space as a prank, proving he had a streak of humor beneath his cool, disciplined exterior. But make no mistake, Young was steady, trusted, unflappable. He was the rock of Apollo 16. If anyone could guide Orion safely to the Descartes Highlands, it was him. Charles Duke, by contrast, was the rookie on the surface. At just 36, he became the youngest man ever to walk on the moon. His journey to Apollo had not been easy. While serving as backup crew for Apollo 13, he had accidentally exposed his teammate Ken Mattingly to rubella, forcing NASA to pull Mattingly just days before launch. Duke carried the guilt of that moment for years. He had been part of one of history's greatest rescues, but only from the sidelines. Apollo 16 was his redemption. This was his chance to prove he was more than the man who had caused a last-minute crisis. He trained relentlessly, mastering geology, rehearsing emergency drills, preparing for the mission that would define his career. And then there was Ken Mattingly. If anyone knew the sting of bad timing, it was him. Pulled from Apollo 13, he had watched as his replacements barely made it home alive. He had lost his chance to be remembered as part of that legendary crew. Apollo 16 was his second chance, his redemption. While Young and Duke explored the surface, Mattingly would orbit alone in the command module, Casper, waiting, calculating, ensuring his crewmates could return safely. His job was lonely but vital. Without him, there would be no return. His solitude above the moon became a silent vigil, a reminder that space exploration was as much about patience and endurance as it was about glory. Together, these three men formed a crew unlike any other. Young, the legend; Duke, the youngest moonwalker; Mattingly, the man who had once been left behind. Each carried scars, regrets, and burdens that shaped their mission. In the cold vacuum of space, under the glare of the world, they were asked to carry not just the weight of a mission, but the weight of redemption. Landing in the Highlands was a gamble. Every step threatened disaster. NASA's engineers feared that the lunar module might sink into soft dust, trapping the astronauts forever. Others worried it would tip on an unseen slope, leaving them stranded. The lander had only seconds of fuel reserved for last-minute corrections. One wrong calculation, one slip in concentration, and the mission could end in tragedy. On the surface, the dangers multiplied. The suits were bulky, every movement exhausting. Falling too hard could tear a seam. Dust clung to everything, abrasive and dangerous. Equipment could fail. Oxygen could run low. For Duke and Young, each moonwalk was a race against time. They had to cover ground quickly, drive the rover across dangerous slopes, and collect samples, all while conserving energy and avoiding mistakes. Exhaustion was constant. Heart rate soared. Inside the helmets, every breath reminded them of how fragile life was on this barren world. And above them, in silent orbit, Mattingly waited. His own risks were different. Alone in the command module, he was cut off from humanity, circling the moon in isolation. Any malfunction could doom him before help could arrive. The mission was designed to push limits. But pushing limits meant walking the razor's edge of catastrophe. Through it all, Charles Duke carried something deeper, something he buried for decades. On the surface of the Highlands, amid the rocks and dust, Duke experienced moments he could never explain. He spoke later of shadows that shifted where no astronaut stood, of lights flickering just beyond the ridges, gone before he could focus, of the strange, unshakable feeling that they were being observed. He told no one. Not NASA, not his crewmates, not even his family. To admit such things would invite ridicule, questions about his sanity, doubts about the mission's credibility. So he stayed silent. For 50 years, he let the official version stand, that Apollo 16 was a triumph of science, a mission that solved one of lunar geology's great mysteries. But inside, he knew that the surface had shown him something else, something beyond geology, beyond science, beyond what human beings were prepared to see. Near the end of his life, Duke finally admitted it. He had seen things on the moon that no training could explain. He stopped short of calling them alien. He didn't assign names or theories. He simply said they were there. Something was out there with them, and once you've seen it, you can never unsee it. Apollo 16 went down in history as a success. Its samples rewrote lunar science. Its crew proved the value of exploration, even in the face of risk. For John Young, it was another triumph in a legendary career. For Ken Mattingly, it was redemption, his chance to finally be part of a mission that succeeded. And for Charles Duke, it was both the pinnacle of achievement and the burden of silence. History remembers Apollo 16 as the mission that dared to land in the Highlands, that risked everything for science. But beneath the data and rocks, beneath the triumph and celebration, lingers a confession that adds another layer to its legacy. It wasn't just about science. It wasn't just about exploration. For Charles Duke, it was about confronting the unknown, the realization that humanity, in its boldest leap, may not have been as alone as it believed. And perhaps, in the silence of the lunar highlands, in the dust of a world untouched for billions of years, we are reminded that exploration is not just about answers. Sometimes it is about questions, questions that linger for decades. Questions that change the way we see the universe and ourselves. Returning from the moon is nothing like landing on Earth. For Charles Duke, stepping off the lunar surface and into the gravity of everyday life was jarring. The cheers, the parades, the cameras, it all felt surreal compared to the silent expanse of the Descartes Highlands. On the moon, every sound, every motion, every moment mattered. Back on Earth, the world seemed loud, chaotic, almost meaningless in comparison. Duke tried to return to normal life, but normal had shifted beneath him. Friends and colleagues congratulated him, praised the Apollo program, and celebrated human achievement. And yet inside he carried a truth he couldn't voice. The secret of what he had seen, something beyond explanation, was heavy, and it followed him like a shadow. For decades, he buried the memory beneath duty and faith. He devoted himself to family, mentoring, public speaking, and sharing lessons of courage and resilience. Yet, on quiet nights, alone in his home, the images returned. The moon wasn't just a collection of rocks and dust. It was a place that had challenged his perception of reality, a place that whispered mysteries he could not reveal. Even his closest colleagues at NASA didn't suspect what he had witnessed. The mission reports, technical logs, and press releases spoke only of success, science, and achievement. Duke kept his secret to himself, understanding that disclosure could cast doubt on the entire Apollo program, undermine decades of public trust, and invite ridicule. The weight of history, the burden of proof, and the fear of disbelief kept his lips sealed. And so, life continued. Duke aged, the world changed, the Apollo program became legend, and the secret remained unspoken but ever present. A reminder that some experiences, no matter how extraordinary, are too heavy to share until the time is right. 50 years of silence takes a toll on the human psyche. For Charles Duke, it wasn't just a matter of keeping a secret. It was a constant balancing act between reality and perception. Every interview, every speech, every casual story about the moonwalk required careful framing. He would smile, joke, recall the science and the adventure, but never, not once, could he mention what he truly saw. The emotional burden of a secret this profound can be corrosive. Duke described sleepless nights where the images returned unbidden, shadows that moved, glimmers of light that defied explanation, and the uncanny sense of being observed. He would replay the mission in his mind, over and over, questioning whether what he saw was real, a trick of the lunar dust, or a figment of imagination. Yet deep down he knew it was real. The decision to remain silent was not born of fear alone. It was duty, loyalty, and respect for the mission and for his crewmates. NASA's legacy was built on trust, precision, and public confidence. Revealing something unexplainable could have undermined decades of scientific achievement, opening the door to ridicule and conspiracy theories. So he carried the burden alone in the quiet spaces of life. Even his family knew only fragments, stories carefully chosen to avoid raising questions. The secret shaped him in subtle ways, a heightened awareness, a quiet reverence for the unknown, and a cautious approach to discussing anything beyond the ordinary. Carrying a secret of cosmic significance is unlike any earthly burden. It isolates you, even among friends and loved ones. Duke understood that truth and belief rarely coincide. He waited, patiently, until the world, or at least his own life, would allow him to speak. And now finally, he did. When Duke's confession became public, the reaction was predictable. Half the world doubted him, the other half believed instantly. Skeptics dismissed his experience as misperception, stress, or illusions created by harsh lunar light and shadow. They cited the rigorous scientific environment, the countless checks and validations, insisting that nothing unexplained could survive the scrutiny of NASA's data. Believers, however, seized the story as validation of a hidden reality. They saw Duke's decades of silence as evidence of a larger truth the world was not ready to confront. For them, the shadows he described and the flickers of light on the lunar surface were signs of something extraordinary, evidence that we may not be alone in our solar system, that the moon may harbor secrets humanity is only beginning to scratch. This debate reflects a broader tension between scientific conservatism and the human need to question the unknown. The same data that proves a rock formed billions of years ago cannot easily account for experiences that challenge perception and expectation. And so, Duke's story became both a catalyst and a lightning rod, forcing people to confront the limits of understanding. Yet even amid public discourse, Duke remained measured. He never claimed to have proof of alien life. He never assigned names or motives to the phenomena he saw. All he did was recount what he personally experienced. In doing so, he created a bridge between rigorous science and human experience, a space where doubt and wonder coexist. The debate continues. Some historians, engineers, and scientists sift through the Apollo data, searching for the moon has long been a canvas for human imagination. From ancient myths to modern science, it has inspired stories of gods, monsters, and celestial wonder. Apollo astronauts have reported strange lights, unusual radio signals, and anomalies in terrain that cannot be explained by conventional geology. Charles Duke's experience fits within this larger pattern of unexplained lunar phenomena. While science can account for the Maria, the craters, and the regolith, it cannot fully explain the shifting shadows he witnessed, the flickering lights that seemed to move with intention, or the feeling of presence that haunted him during the lunar walks. This raises questions humanity has not yet answered. Is the moon truly uninhabited? Are there remnants of phenomena that predate human observation? Could Apollo crews have glimpsed something that cannot be captured by cameras or instruments, something that exists just beyond the threshold of perception? Duke himself never theorized publicly. He left interpretation to others, understanding that the unknown is often more valuable than the answer. There is a subtle power in mystery, a recognition that exploration is about confronting questions that may have no immediate solution. The moon, in its silent majesty, continues to guard secrets, some of which may remain hidden for generations. Humanity has returned to Earth with rocks and data, with maps and measurements. Yet the true lesson of Apollo 16, the unspoken lesson, is that exploration exposes the limits of human understanding. Even in the age of technology, there are experiences that resist explanation, events that challenge our perception of reality, and mysteries that endure in the silent void of space. Charles Duke's confession is a testament to courage, not just in space, but in life. It takes bravery to confront the unknown, and even greater bravery to admit that you have witnessed it. For decades, he held a secret that might have been dismissed, ridiculed, or feared. Yet in the twilight of his life, he chose honesty, offering a glimpse of a universe more complex than humanity can yet comprehend. Apollo 16's legacy is thus twofold. On one hand, it was a scientific triumph, rocks collected, hypotheses tested, and human ingenuity proven. On the other, it is a story of mystery, the subtle acknowledgement that some truths may lie beyond the reach of instruments, beyond the grasp of words, and even beyond the limits of human imagination. The confession reminds us that exploration is never complete. The universe is vast, indifferent, and full of wonders that may never be fully understood. Each generation that reaches for the stars carries the possibility of discovering not only what is out there, but also what is within ourselves. Curiosity, courage, and the humility to accept that some questions remain unanswered. Future astronauts, whether part of NASA's Artemis program, private missions to the moon, or journeys to Mars, may one day confirm or deny Duke's account. But even if they do not, the story endures. It is a reminder that the greatest discoveries are not always tangible, that sometimes the most profound truths are the ones that challenge our very perception of reality. And perhaps that is the ultimate legacy of Apollo 16. Not the rocks, not the experiments, not even the moonwalks themselves, but the courage to venture into the unknown and to return changed, carrying with you a story the world is not yet ready to hear.